An HOA president ripped the oxygen tube from a pregnant woman in labor because a truck was parked in the driveway. The woman collapsed, turning blue, while her baby fought for life inside her. In court, the judge looked at the defendant and said one word: attempted murder. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The September heat pressed down on Meadowbrook Estates like a suffocating blanket. Sarah Martinez clutched her swollen belly as another contraction rippled through her body. 8 months pregnant, and the baby had decided today was the day to make an early entrance. "David, we need to go now," she gasped, her voice breaking with pain. Her husband David dropped the wrench he'd been using to fix their garden hose and rushed to her side. His calloused hands, still dirty from work, gently supported her weight. "I've got you, mi amor. Just breathe." But Sarah couldn't breathe. Not properly. The asthma that had plagued her since childhood had worsened during pregnancy. Her doctor had prescribed a portable oxygen concentrator that sat beside her day and night. Without it, every breath was a struggle. With the baby pressing against her lungs and the premature labor starting, she needed that oxygen more than ever. David grabbed the concentrator with one hand while supporting Sarah with the other. The machine hummed its familiar rhythm as the clear tubes delivered life-giving oxygen to her struggling lungs. He guided her toward their old pickup truck parked in the driveway. They had almost reached the vehicle when a sharp voice cut through the air like a knife. "Stop right there." Karen Whitmore stood at the end of their driveway, her arms crossed over her chest. The HOA president had made their lives miserable for the past 6 months since they'd bought their modest home in the neighborhood. Every violation notice, every fine, every complaint had come from her perfectly manicured fingertips. "You cannot park that disgusting truck in your driveway," Karen snapped, her blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent scowl. "HOA rules clearly state all vehicles must be parked in the garage. I've told you this 17 times. My wife is in labor," David said through gritted teeth, trying to move past her. "We need to get to the hospital now." Sarah whimpered, another contraction seizing her body. Her fingers dug into David's arm as pain exploded through her abdomen. The oxygen concentrator continued its steady hum, the only thing keeping her conscious. "That's not my problem," Karen said, stepping directly into their path. "Rules are rules. You'll receive another fine for this violation. And what is that ridiculous contraption?" She pointed at the oxygen concentrator with disgust, as if the medical device personally offended her. "It's her oxygen," David said, his voice rising. "She needs it to breathe. Now please move." "Medical equipment is not allowed to be visible from the street," Karen declared, pulling out her phone. She began typing furiously, no doubt documenting another violation. "This is extremely unsightly and brings down property values. You need to keep that hidden inside your home." Sarah's breathing grew more labored. Even with the oxygen, she was struggling. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint, and sweat poured down her pale face. The baby was coming, and every second counted. "Get out of my way," David warned, his protective instincts overwhelming his usual patience. "Don't you dare threaten me," Karen shrieked. "I am the president of this HOA, and you will respect my authority." What happened next would haunt David for the rest of his life. Karen reached down and yanked the oxygen tube from Sarah's nose. The sudden loss of oxygen hit Sarah like a physical blow. She gasped, her eyes going wide with terror as her lungs struggled to pull in air. Her knees buckled, and David barely caught her before she collapsed. "What are you doing?" David roared, lowering Sarah gently to the ground. "Teaching you a lesson about following rules," Karen said coldly, holding the oxygen tube above her head like a trophy. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before defying HOA regulations." Sarah's gasps became desperate wheezes. Her fingers clawed at her throat as panic and oxygen deprivation took hold. The baby, sensing its mother's distress, began to shift and press harder, accelerating the labor. David's hands shook as he tried to reconnect the oxygen tube, but Karen danced backward, keeping it out of reach. "Give it back," he screamed, torn between chasing Karen and staying with his dying wife. "Say you'll follow the rules," Karen demanded, her eyes gleaming with sick satisfaction. Sarah's lips were turning blue. Her gasps grew weaker. Blood began to seep through her dress as the traumatic labor progressed too quickly. Her eyes found David's, filled with terror and love and a desperate plea to save their baby. Time seemed to slow down. David made a choice that would define him forever. He scooped Sarah into his arms, concentrator and all, and ran. Not to the truck. That would take too long to start. He ran toward the street, screaming for help with everything he had. "Somebody help us. Call 911. My wife is dying." Mr. Chen, their elderly neighbor, was watering his roses. He dropped the hose immediately and pulled out his phone. Mrs. Patterson from across the street came running. She took one look at Sarah's blue face and the blood spreading across her dress and understood immediately. "I'm a retired nurse," she said, kneeling beside them as David lowered Sarah to the grass. "What happened?" "She needs oxygen," David sobbed, pointing at Karen who still held the tube. "That woman took it. She's 8 months pregnant. The baby's coming." Mrs. Patterson's face went pale. Then red. Then twisted with fury. "You did what?" she shouted at Karen. Karen suddenly seemed to realize the gravity of what she'd done. Her face went slack, and she dropped the oxygen tube. But she didn't apologize. Instead, she turned and walked quickly toward her house. "Oh no you don't," Mrs. Patterson said. She had been a military nurse before retiring, and her voice carried the weight of authority. "Mr. Chen, don't let that woman leave. She just committed assault, maybe murder." Mr. Chen, despite his 78 years, positioned himself between Karen and her house. His face was set in stone. Mrs. Patterson reconnected Sarah's oxygen and began checking her vitals. What she found made her heart sink. "David, I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said softly. "Sarah's going into shock. The baby is in distress. We need that ambulance now, and even then." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Sarah's eyes fluttered open for a moment. She looked at David with so much love it broke his heart into a million pieces. "The baby," she whispered. "Save our baby." "Don't talk like that," David begged, tears streaming down his face. "You're both going to be fine. You have to be fine. I can't lose you. I can't raise our daughter without you." "Emma," Sarah breathed. "Her name is Emma. Promise me you'll tell her." "No," David sobbed. "No, no, no. You're going to tell her yourself. You're going to teach her to dance like you do. You're going to braid her hair and read her stories. You promised me forever, Sarah. You promised." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Sarah's hand found David's and squeezed with the last of her strength. "I love you," she whispered. "Always." Then her eyes closed, and her hand went limp. The ambulance arrived 3 minutes later, but those 3 minutes felt like 3 lifetimes to David. The paramedics worked with desperate efficiency, loading Sarah into the ambulance while monitoring the baby's fading heartbeat. "Sir, you need to come with us," one paramedic said gently. "Your wife needs emergency surgery." David climbed into the ambulance, his mind numb with shock. As they pulled away, he looked back and saw Karen trying to slip into her house. But Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Chen had been joined by 5 other neighbors, forming a human wall. "The police are on their way," Mrs. Patterson called out. "You're not going anywhere." At Mercy General Hospital, Sarah was rushed into emergency surgery. The doctors managed to deliver baby Emma via cesarean section. She was tiny, just 4 pounds, but her lungs were strong. Her first cry echoed through the operating room like a miracle. But Sarah didn't wake up. The oxygen deprivation combined with the traumatic labor had caused severe complications. She had suffered a stroke and massive internal bleeding. The doctors worked for 6 hours to save her life. David sat in the waiting room, holding tiny Emma in his arms, praying harder than he'd ever prayed in his life. Mrs. Patterson sat beside him, having followed in her own car. "That woman needs to pay for what she did," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "I've already given my statement to the police. Mr. Chen did too. And we have security footage. Several homes on our street have cameras." David couldn't process her words. All he could see was Sarah's face as she gasped for air. All he could hear was her whisper, "Save our baby." Finally, a doctor emerged. His face told David everything before he spoke a word. "Mr. Martinez, your wife is alive, but she's in critical condition. The next 48 hours will determine everything. The stroke has caused significant damage. Even if she survives, she may never be the same." David's world collapsed. He looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in his arms, unaware that her mother was fighting for every breath. "Can I see her?" "Yes, but only for a few minutes." Sarah lay in the ICU, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed. Tubes ran from her body to various monitors and 4 bags. She looked so small and fragile, nothing like the vibrant woman who danced in their kitchen while cooking dinner. David took her hand carefully, mindful of all the medical equipment. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I should have protected you better. I should have stopped her. Emma is here, and she's beautiful, just like you. She has your eyes and your little nose. You have to wake up, Sarah. You have to meet your daughter. Please, mi amor. Please fight. Fight for Emma. Fight for us." But Sarah remained still, caught between life and death. Detective James Morrison had been with the police force for 23 years. He'd seen a lot of terrible things, but the security footage from Meadowbrook Estates made his blood boil. The video was crystal clear. Karen Whitmore deliberately yanking the oxygen tube from a pregnant woman in obvious distress. Sarah collapsing. Karen holding the tube out of reach while demanding compliance with HOA rules. The terror on David's face. The blue tint spreading across Sarah's lips. "This isn't just assault," Morrison said to his partner, Detective Lisa Chen. "This is attempted murder. Maybe even attempted double murder if we count the baby." "The DA is going to have a field day with this one," Lisa agreed. "I've got statements from 7 neighbors. They all paint the same picture. Karen Whitmore has been terrorizing this family for months." The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Karen had filed 63 HOA violations against the Martinez family in 6 months. Most were for absurd reasons. Their grass was a 1/4 inch too long, their mailbox was the wrong shade of black, their welcome mat was 2 inches over the acceptable size. But the violations went deeper than just harassment. Karen had blocked their attempts to install a wheelchair ramp for Sarah's mother who visited weekly. She denied their request for medical equipment parking permits. She'd even tried to fine them for hanging laundry outside to dry because it was unsightly, despite the fact that their dryer had broken and they couldn't afford to replace it immediately. She was on a power trip, Morrison said, reviewing the case files. And she took it too far. Karen Whitmore was arrested at her home 2 days after the incident. She answered the door in a silk bathrobe, a glass of wine in her hand, seemingly unconcerned about the gravity of what she'd done. "This is ridiculous," she said as Detective Morrison read her rights. "That woman was being dramatic. I barely touched her oxygen thing. And she's fine, isn't she? I heard the baby was born healthy." "Ma'am, Sarah Martinez has suffered a severe stroke and may never recover," Morrison said, his voice cold. "Her doctors say the oxygen deprivation directly caused the stroke. You nearly killed a mother and her unborn child." For the first time, Karen's confidence wavered. I didn't mean. I was just trying to enforce the rules. It's my job as HOA president. Your job is about to cost you everything, Morrison said, snapping the handcuffs on her wrists. The story exploded across local and then national news. HOA president attacks pregnant woman in labor, dominated headlines. The security footage went viral, racking up millions of views within 48 hours. Public outrage reached a fever pitch. People from across the country sent messages of support to David and donations for Sarah's medical bills. A GoFundMe campaign raised over $300,000 in the first week. But not everyone was sympathetic. Karen's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Thornton, appeared on morning talk shows defending her actions. My client was simply performing her duties as HOA president, Thornton argued. She had no way of knowing that removing the oxygen tube would cause such severe consequences. This was an unfortunate accident, not attempted murder. The interviewer, a no-nonsense journalist named Patricia Williams, wasn't having it. Mr. Thornton, the video clearly shows your client holding the oxygen tube out of reach while Mrs. Martinez collapsed. She demanded compliance with HOA rules while a pregnant woman was dying in front of her. How is that an accident? HOA regulations exist for a reason, Thornton deflected. Property values must be maintained. My client was simply doing her job. Her job is to enforce rules about lawn maintenance, not to withhold life-saving medical equipment from a woman in labor, Patricia shot back. Your client's actions nearly killed 2 people. That's not about property values. That's about a dangerous abuse of power. The interview clip went viral too, with millions agreeing with Patricia's assessment. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Sarah remained in a coma. David barely left her side, alternating between feeding Emma and holding Sarah's hand, talking to her constantly. The whole world is on your side, he told her softly. People are so angry about what happened. They're demanding justice. But I don't care about any of that. I just need you to wake up. Emma needs her mother. I need my wife. On the 7th day, something miraculous happened. Sarah's fingers twitched. Then her eyelids fluttered. David, who had been dozing in the chair beside her bed, jerked awake. Sarah? Can you hear me? Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first. Then they found David's face and filled with tears. The baby, she croaked, her voice barely audible. She's perfect, David sobbed with relief. Emma is perfect and healthy. She's sleeping in the nursery right now. I want to see her. Soon, mi amor. The doctors need to check you first. But you're awake. You came back to us. I knew you would. I knew you'd fight. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Sarah had survived the worst, but the stroke had left her with partial paralysis on her right side and difficulty speaking. She would need months of physical therapy, and there was no guarantee of full recovery. But she was alive. And she was a fighter. 3 months later, Karen Whitmore stood trial. The courtroom was packed with reporters, neighbors from Meadowbrook Estates, and people from across the state who had followed the story. David sat in the front row, holding Emma in his arms. Sarah sat beside him in a wheelchair, her speech still slurred but her determination unshakable. She had insisted on being there despite her doctor's concerns. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Margaret Chen, a fierce advocate known for her passionate closing arguments. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, this is a case about power and cruelty. Karen Whitmore had power as HOA president, and she wielded it like a weapon. For 6 months, she tormented the Martinez family with petty violations and unreasonable demands. But on September 15, she went too far. She didn't just abuse her power. She used it to nearly commit murder. The prosecution's case was devastating. Security footage was played, showing every horrible second of Karen yanking the oxygen tube away. Medical experts testified about how oxygen deprivation affects pregnant women and unborn babies. Neighbors described Karen's pattern of harassment. Mrs. Patterson took the stand and described the scene in heartbreaking detail. "I've seen a lot in my 40 years as a nurse, but I've never seen anything as cruel as what that woman did. Sarah Martinez was dying in front of her, and Karen Whitmore didn't care. She held that oxygen tube like it was a toy, like Sarah's life meant nothing. That baby could have died. Sarah could have died. And Karen showed no remorse, no compassion, nothing." Mr. Chen testified about Karen's attempt to flee the scene. Other neighbors shared stories of her cruelty, threatening to foreclose on an elderly couple who couldn't afford HOA fees, forcing a single mother to remove her children's playground equipment because it was unsightly, denying requests for reasonable accommodations. But the most powerful testimony came from David. "Karen Whitmore didn't just attack my wife that day," he said, his voice breaking. "She attacked our future. Our dreams. Our family. Sarah was supposed to have a natural birth. She was supposed to hold our daughter immediately. Instead, she had an emergency cesarean while having a stroke. She missed the first month of Emma's life because she was in a coma. She may never fully recover. And for what? Because our truck was in the driveway. Because she didn't like how our oxygen concentrator looked." He paused, tears streaming down his face. "I watched the woman I love suffocate in front of me. I watched her turn blue and collapse. And I couldn't save her because Karen Whitmore cared more about HOA rules than human life. That's not about property values or following regulations. That's evil." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people crying. The defense tried to paint Karen as a dedicated HOA president who made an error in judgment. They argued that she didn't understand the severity of Sarah's condition, that she panicked, that she never intended to cause harm. But when Karen took the stand, she destroyed any sympathy the jury might have had. "I was just doing my job," she said defensively. "HOA rules exist for everyone's benefit. If I made exceptions for the Martinez family, then everyone would want exceptions. Property values would plummet. The neighborhood would fall apart." "Ms. Whitmore," DHN asked, "did you know that Sarah Martinez was 8 months pregnant when you took her oxygen?" "I saw that she was pregnant, yes." "Did you know she was in labor?" "Her husband claimed that, but I thought he was being dramatic." "Did you hear her gasping for breath?" "She was breathing just fine." "Ms. Whitmore," multiple witnesses testified that Mrs. Martinez's lips were turning blue. "The security footage shows her collapsing." "How was she breathing just fine?" Karen hesitated, realizing her mistake. "I didn't notice." "You didn't notice a pregnant woman in medical distress collapsing in front of you?" "I was focused on the HOA violation." "You were focused on a truck in a driveway while a woman was dying in front of you?" "That's not fair. You're twisting my words." "Ms. Whitmore, why didn't you give the oxygen tube back when Mr. Martinez begged you to?" "Because they needed to learn that rules matter." The courtroom erupted. The judge had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. "You prioritized HOA rules over a human life?" DHN asked, her voice rising with righteous anger. "I didn't think she was actually dying." "What did you think was happening when she collapsed and stopped moving?" I don't know." "You don't know. Or you didn't care." "Objection." Karen's lawyer shouted. "Withdrawn," DHN said. No further questions. The damage was done. Karen had shown no genuine remorse, no real understanding of the harm she'd caused. She had revealed herself to be exactly what everyone suspected, a petty tyrant who valued rules over human life. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours. When they returned, every person in the courtroom held their breath. "On the count of aggravated assault with great bodily injury, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of child endangerment, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of attempted voluntary manslaughter, how do you find?" Guilty. Karen's face went white. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. For the first time, she looked at Sarah, who was crying softly in her wheelchair. Judge Maria Rodriguez, a stern woman with decades of experience, looked at Karen with undisguised contempt. Ms. Whitmore, in my 30 years on the bench, I have seen many terrible things. But what you did goes beyond ordinary cruelty. You saw a pregnant woman in medical distress, and instead of helping her, you weaponized her condition. You held life-saving medical equipment out of reach while demanding compliance with rules about parking and aesthetics. The judge paused, letting her words sink in. You showed no mercy, no compassion, no basic human decency. Because of your actions, Sarah Martinez suffered a severe stroke that has permanently disabled her. She will never fully recover. She missed the first month of her daughter's life. She will need assistance with basic tasks for the rest of her life. And you did this because you didn't like where a truck was parked. Karen's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record. She's a respected member of her community. We ask for leniency. Respected? Judge Rodriguez interrupted. Counselor, during this trial, we heard testimony from dozens of neighbors describing your client's pattern of harassment, cruelty, and abuse of power. She used her position to torment people, particularly those who were vulnerable. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was the culmination of a pattern of behavior that shows a complete disregard for other people's welfare. The judge turned back to Karen. There's a term I've heard in discussions of this case. Attempted murder. The prosecution charged you with attempted voluntary manslaughter, which you've been convicted of. But I want you to understand something, Ms. Whitmore. What you did was attempt murder. You deliberately withheld life-saving medical equipment from a dying woman. You held it out of reach while she collapsed. You demanded compliance with petty rules while she suffocated. That's not manslaughter. That's attempted murder. Karen finally broke. She began to cry, but they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. I hereby sentence you to 15 years in state prison. You will serve a minimum of 12 years before being eligible for parole. Additionally, you are permanently banned from serving in any HOA or community organization leadership position. You will pay full restitution for all of Sarah Martinez's medical bills and ongoing care costs. And you will issue a public apology acknowledging the full extent of your actions and their consequences. Gasps filled the courtroom. 15 years was an unusually harsh sentence for the charges, but Judge Rodriguez wasn't finished. I want this sentence to send a message. HOA boards are not kingdoms. Presidents are not dictators. Rules about lawn maintenance and parking do not supersede human life. What you did, Ms. Whitmore, was use your tiny amount of power to hurt people who couldn't fight back. That ends today. The bailiff led Karen away in handcuffs. She was still crying, finally understanding that her actions had real consequences. David squeezed Sarah's hand. Emma, now 4 months old, cooed softly in Sarah's lap. It's over, David whispered. Justice was served. The months following the trial were difficult but hopeful. Sarah worked tirelessly in physical therapy, determined to regain as much function as possible. The GoFundMe campaign, combined with the restitution from Karen, meant they didn't have to worry about medical bills. The Martinez family also received an unexpected gift. The remaining HOA board members at Meadowbrook Estates, horrified by what had happened, voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. They issued a public apology to David and Sarah and worked to refund unnecessary fines to all residents. Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Chen became Emma's honorary grandparents, helping with childcare while Sarah attended therapy and David returned to work. The entire neighborhood rallied around the family, bringing meals, offering support, and celebrating Sarah's small victories. 6 months after the trial, Sarah spoke her first clear sentence without slurring, "I love you both so much." David cried. Emma giggled. And Sarah smiled, the first real smile since that terrible September day. A year after the incident, Sarah could walk short distances with a cane. Her right hand still didn't work perfectly, but she could hold Emma with her left arm. She would never fully recover, but she had recovered enough to be the mother she'd always dreamed of being. The story of Karen Whitmore and the oxygen tube became a cautionary tale discussed in HOA meetings across the country. Many organizations reformed their policies, adding protections for medical equipment, emergency situations, and vulnerable residents. Karen, meanwhile, sat in prison. Other inmates had seen the news coverage. They knew what she'd done. Life behind bars was not easy for someone who had hurt a pregnant mother. She finally wrote the required public apology, though it was clear her lawyer had drafted most of it. But there was one line that seemed genuine. "I thought rules mattered more than people. I was wrong. I will spend the rest of my life knowing I almost destroyed a family because I cared more about how things looked than how people felt." 3 years after the incident, Emma took her first steps. Sarah cried watching her daughter toddle across the living room into David's waiting arms. She still needed her cane, still struggled with complex tasks, but she was there. She was alive. She was Emma's mother. They had moved away from Meadowbrook Estates, buying a small house with no HOA in a quiet neighborhood where people cared about each other rather than property values. They planted a garden in the front yard, flowers, vegetables, whatever they wanted. No one complained. Neighbors complimented their beautiful roses. David framed a photo of the three of them, Sarah in her wheelchair, him standing behind her, Emma on Sarah's lap, taken on the courthouse steps after the sentencing. It hung in their living room as a reminder that justice existed, that good people would stand up against cruelty, that love could survive even the darkest moments. Sarah still used her oxygen concentrator sometimes, especially during physical exertion. But she never let Emma see her afraid of it. Instead, she taught her daughter that the machine was a helper, a friend, something that made mommy stronger. "Why does mommy need that?" Emma asked one day, pointing at the concentrator. "Because a bad lady hurt mommy when mommy was bringing you into the world," Sarah explained gently. "But mommy is strong. And this machine helps mommy breathe so mommy can play with you." "The bad lady went away." "Yes, baby. The bad lady went away for a very long time. And good people made sure she couldn't hurt anyone else." Emma considered this seriously. "Good." Sarah pulled her daughter close, breathing in her sweet scent. Every breath was a gift. Every moment with Emma was a miracle. And every day, she grew stronger. David started a non-profit organization called Breath of Justice that helped families navigate HOA disputes and advocated for protections for people with medical needs. The organization helped pass legislation in 17 states requiring HOAs to provide reasonable accommodations for medical equipment and prohibiting retaliation against residents with disabilities. Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Chin testified before state legislatures about what they'd witnessed. Their powerful testimonies helped change laws and protect vulnerable people from tyrants like Karen Whitmore. The security camera footage became a training video for HOA boards across the nation, a stark reminder of what happens when petty power goes unchecked. And Karen Whitmore sat in her cell, watching years of her life disappear, knowing she had thrown everything away because she cared more about rules than people, more about appearances than compassion, more about power than humanity. 5 years after the incident, Sarah received a letter. It came from the state prison and was written in Karen's handwriting. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. David sat beside her, holding her hand. The letter was 3 pages long. It didn't make excuses. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It simply said, "Dear Sarah, I don't expect you to read this. I don't deserve your time or attention. But I need you to know something. I destroyed your life because I thought being important mattered more than being kind. I thought enforcing rules made me powerful. I thought people needed to fear me to respect me. I was wrong about everything. Every day in here, I think about what I did to you. I see your face turning blue. I hear your husband screaming. I remember holding your oxygen tube like it was a toy while you died in front of me. I am sorry. Those words mean nothing. They can't give you back your health. They can't erase your trauma. They can't return the time you lost with your daughter. But I am sorry. I am so deeply, truly sorry. I was a monster. I used the small power I had to hurt people who couldn't fight back. I convinced myself I was maintaining standards when really I was just feeding my ego. You didn't deserve what I did to you. No one did. And I will carry the weight of my actions for the rest of my life. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just needed you to know that I finally understand. Rules don't matter more than people. Appearances don't matter more than kindness. Power without compassion is just cruelty. You taught me that. You, lying on the grass gasping for air while I stood over you caring only about my authority. You, fighting your way back from death to be the mother your daughter needs. You, surviving despite everything I took from you. I hope your daughter grows up strong and brave like her mother. I hope your family finds peace. I hope someday you can think about what happened without pain. I am sorry. Karen. Sarah read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. Are you okay? David asked gently. Yeah, Sarah said. I think I am. Do you forgive her? Sarah thought about that for a long moment. I don't know if I can forgive her. What she did changed our lives forever. I'll never be the same. We'll never get back what we lost. She paused, looking at Emma playing with her toys in the corner, a healthy, happy 5-year-old who would start kindergarten in the fall. But I won't let hate live in my heart. I won't let what she did make me bitter. She's in prison. She lost everything. Justice was served. And we survived. We're still here. We're still a family. That's enough. David kissed her forehead. You're the strongest person I know. I'm strong because I have to be, Sarah said. For Emma. For you. For everyone who stood up for us. Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Chen and all those neighbors who refused to let her get away with it. They gave us justice. Now we have to give Emma something better. We have to teach her to be kind in a world that isn't always kind. To stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. To use whatever power she has to help, not hurt. That evening, Sarah and David took Emma to the park. Sarah still used her cane, still moved slowly, but she was there. She pushed Emma on the swing, laughing at her daughter's delighted squeals. A young woman approached them hesitantly. Excuse me, are you Sarah Martinez? From the news? Sarah tensed, but the woman's face was kind. I am, Sarah said carefully. I just wanted to thank you, the woman said. My HOA was harassing me about my disabled parking space. I have multiple sclerosis, and they said my placard was unsightly, and wanted me to park in back where no one could see me. But after your case, new laws passed. I showed them the legislation, and they backed down immediately. You saved me from going through what you went through. You changed things. Thank you. The woman walked away before Sarah could respond. But her words stayed with Sarah all evening. Pain had purpose. Suffering had meaning. Not because it should have happened, but because Sarah had transformed it into something that protected others. Her trauma had become armor for vulnerable people across the country. That night, as she tucked Emma into bed, Sarah thought about Karen's letter again. She thought about forgiveness and justice and the complicated space between them. Maybe someday she would forgive Karen Whitmore. Maybe not. But she would live well. She would love deeply. She would fight for people who needed protection. And she would teach Emma that power should serve compassion, that rules should serve humanity, that life is too precious to waste on petty cruelty. Mommy? Emma asked sleepily. Can you tell me a story? Once upon a time, Sarah began, there was a little girl who taught the whole world about courage. And in the morning, Sarah would wake up and breathe, sometimes easily, sometimes with help from her machine, but always grateful, and face another day of healing, fighting, and living. Because that's what survivors do. They survive. They heal. They protect others. They transform pain into purpose. And they teach their children that love is stronger than hate, that justice matters, and that every breath is a gift worth fighting for. The end.